chapter 4, we're going to look at the very end of that. Apologize for my voice, I'm a little under the weather. But we're going to get through this anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Now who remembers what we talked about last week?
Woman at the well.
Woman at the well. That's right. And so what I brought out last week was the fact that it was very odd that he was talking at all to the Samaritans, to any of the Samaritans. The word says that he was down in Jerusalem, the land of Judea. Then he had to travel up to, he wanted to go to Galilee. We're going to see here in the next couple chapters that he goes from Galilee back down to the land of Judea. So he's constantly going back and forth, and the trail that he took, the road that he took led him right through the area of Samaria. Not uncommon. What was uncommon was for him to strike up a conversation with any of the Samaritans. That's what was really weird. And we're going to see that today when his disciples come back. They thought it was a little strange he was talking to a woman, let alone that she was a Samaritan. And so Christ is breaking down all sorts of barriers today. So we're going to see here in our lesson today more examples, more lessons that Christ wants to show his disciples. And so what we see here is that, let's just recap from a little bit from last week. Jesus is talking to her, strikes up a conversation. He's very specific in what he says. He's talking about water. He draws in a conversation about water. And now he's talking about giving her water to drink instead of her sitting at the well ready to give him a drink. No, he's going to give her a drink, and the water is an everlasting water, which is what he says in verse 14. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. Haven't we all drank that? Isn't that something that we partake of? Yeah. It's a blessing. There's nothing in this world, and we've all experienced this, the temporal joy that something can give us, or some place, or some event, or some person even. But that's just temporal. There's nothing lasting other than Jesus and our relationship with him. There's nothing. You know, we can go around, we can say, if I just did this, or if I just had that, or if I could just go there, or whatever, I would just be happy. You know, but there's nothing that satisfies like Jesus. When you drink from the well of Christ, you're full. You don't want to go anywhere else. You want to go back to that well. And so that's what Jesus means when he says, I'm going to give him the water, and it's going to become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life, and you're never going to thirst again. And so it just really sticks with me. Every time a thought creeps into my mind, you know, I could just be happy if. It's not really going to make you happy. Maybe it does for a little while, but then it wears off. Does the power of Christ ever just wear off? You know, if it does, there's something wrong. It's on our end, but it's not on Christ. And so he's there for us all the time. It says, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. So he's drawing her in a little bit, as it were. With his words, she's a little interested now. Jesus said to her, Go call your husband and come here. This is where he's going to get her now with a miracle. And he says today, in our lesson today, that unless you people hear or see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. This is a sign and this is a wonder. The fact that he was able to tell her from the time that she was, tell her all about her life from the time she was probably a very young woman to the time that she's meeting him at the well. He says, Go call your husband and come here. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You have well said, I have no husband. I'm going to give you a miracle now. Because I'm going to tell you all about you. And I couldn't possibly have known that. He didn't send spies out to spy on her, get the 411 on her some other way. He didn't go to TMZ, nothing like that. He is now miraculously, a miracle, looking into her life and telling her all that she's ever done. He says, For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. He could see that the one that she has now, maybe that was a miracle. I thought about that. Maybe she was trying to buffalo other people out there into thinking that was her husband. Maybe everybody thought that. but maybe she realized she couldn't trick this man that she just met.
Your brother.
And so he says, the one you have now is not your husband. I mean, you never actually got married. Well, who would have known that other than Jesus? See, that could have been a miracle in and of itself, the fact that only he knew that. And so this is why she leaves her water pot and she runs away and says, I can't believe this, you know. So the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. This is a beautiful passage because it's pointing to the future, where there isn't going to be a worship place on the mountain that she's talking about. It's not going to be at the temple. It's going to be the church, and it's going to be transitioning, and Jesus is looking for those people to transition with him. The people that haven't transitioned with him are the Orthodox Jews. They didn't jump on board. They still think Jesus is coming the first time, that he never came. But he came to switch things up. He came to change things. And this is what we're looking at. When we look in the New Testament, or the epistles and all that, that's after everything's changed. Here things are beginning to change. And so we see here that these are just little hints that Jesus is dropping to the Samaritans and to a Gentile here and there, that these people are going to be included one day, and that the disciples better get on board with that, because they're the ones who are going to be leading this after Jesus is gone. And so Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. It says, you worship what you do not know. He's calling out the Samaritans. He's absolutely right. The Samaritans were all about pantheon. They're all about many gods and incorporating other gods. They were Israel of the Old Testament when Israel went bad. You look at all the gods they worshipped in the high hills and everything. Yeah, they threw this mountain in there that Jacob was worshipped at. Okay, but what about all your other gods? Well, we worship them too. He's saying salvation isn't of that. Salvation is of the Jews. It's in Jerusalem. And so he says, you worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation's of the Jews, but the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. I mean, God isn't some molded image or some stones and some rocks that you can build, and that's God, or a golden calf. No, it's not it at all. So in her mind, she's got all these things just kind of smashing and hitting each other as far as what gods are. She said, he says, God is spirit. And for us, the same is true today. God is spirit. And so how do we worship God? It's in spirit. It's in truth. I said last week that you can't just have spirit. You have to have truth with it too. It's worship with guardrails. It's not just worship. I can worship God on a mountain by myself. Is that the truth part of it, though? The worshiping God, outside of a building, that's correct. Designated building, only that building. Well, that's correct. That's the spirit part. But the truth part is worshiping God with the church, the ones who were sanctioned, the ones who Jesus built in gospels like this. And so we see that it's truth with guardrails. And so he says, the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. Let's just cut to the chase, because you sound like you might be somebody. I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. So now she's exposing her faith a little bit here. She's saying, I know that the Messiah is coming. I trust that he's coming. I've believed, who knows how long, probably her whole life, that the Christ, the Messiah, is going to come one day. And when he does, he's going to tell us all things. Do you think she was excited about seeing the Christ in her lifetime, if that ever happened? Do you think there was false rumors about people that claimed that they were the Christ, that got a following for a little while, dropped off? In the Maccabean revolt, you had other people that just before Jesus had come along in Israel, and they tried to make, their main topic was paying taxes. They didn't want to pay taxes to Rome. So they got a bunch of followers, and they said, we're going to overthrow Rome. Boy, this guy could really be the Christ. What happened? Rome put him down and then fizzled. All the followers scattered and never heard from him again. Is that what happened with Jesus? Rome put him down, And you have the disciples fled for a while, but he came back. And he'd been back. We don't talk about the other guys. We talk about Jesus today, because he's different. And so her looking for that man, her whole life says, when he comes, he's going to tell us all things. How exciting is it that she's talking to the one that she's looking for her whole life? Amazing. And so then he says, Jesus said to her, I who speak to you. Wow. My jaw would drop. My pails of water, I would just drop it. And I would go. I'd go tell everybody I knew. It's amazing.
You mean like what she did?
Exactly.
I just find it interesting that as a Samaritan and her taking her stance on the Samaritans worshiping in their place and you Jews have your own, that she still embraced the Messiah. And the Messiah, of course, she would have to go to the Hebrew Scriptures to get that information. So apparently they hadn't separated themselves from the Hebrew Scriptures, I guess at this junction in their time in their history, just maybe their center of worship, or it folded other things into it. But for her to expect Messiah, where else was written about Messiah was the Jewish Scriptures.
That's half of her saying that.
That's one half of her.
Because she's half Jew.
Yeah.
I mean, so she's got half of that influence. The other half is who knows what. I mean, it could be anything. But she has half of that influence running around. That's why she's expecting Messiah. So verse 27, our lesson today says, and at this point his disciples came. Where were his disciples? Weren't they off getting food? Isn't that why Jesus sat down by the well? Because he was weary. He was tired. It was noon, by the way. I don't know how long this conversation took, but it's straight up noon. One of the hottest parts of the day. He's tired. He's hungry. He's thirsty. Did he ever get that drink that he asked the Samaritan woman for? I don't think so. No, he did. We're going to see that his lesson today involves this. So he says, at that point his disciples came, and they marveled that he talked with a woman. Once again, cultural barriers are being broken. Jesus didn't care that she was a woman. He didn't care that he was a Samaritan or a Samaritan woman. He struck up a conversation with her anyway. Yet no one said, what do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? Nobody dared ask that. I think that's very interesting. I don't even know what all there is to that. But the disciples, for some reason, decided to not ask that question. So the woman then left her water pot. I can just picture her scurrying, scampering, if you will, a jog run. The woman left her water pot, went her way into the city, and said to the men, come, see a man who told me all things I ever did. Could this be the Christ? So they went out of the city and came to him. Apparently this well was outside of the city. And apparently the men were just standing around in the marketplace. Maybe they were buying food, whatever. She went to right where she knew everybody would be. And she exclaimed, probably yelling, come see a man. Could this be the Christ? So they went out of the city and came to him. In the meantime, his disciples urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. You drink something. We're at a well. We brought food. We bought it, and we brought it. You need to eat. See, Christ made everything a teaching moment because he knew time was fleeting. And time's fleeting in our own lives, too. We only have so much time to really get it right. And the older I get, the more I realize that. And I feel like a little kid sometimes when and all these lessons have been pounded into my head through myself, through preaching, through teaching, through devotions, through singing, whatever the case might be, or just personal communication. And we've all done that. They get brought to our attention all the time, and then all of a sudden, after months and maybe years, you finally get it. You're like, wow, that's what I'm supposed to be doing, or that should be my attitude. I feel like a little kid, but you only get so much time to learn that.
Layer upon layer, line upon line.
And it's frustrating for me because I like to get things done quick. I like to get in there, do it, get it done. But that doesn't work all the time. It's just, life isn't like that. As long as we keep putting ourselves in the situation of learning about Jesus, learning under his control, that's the best place to be. Because then it will happen. but maybe not right away, maybe not on our time schedule. But it will happen. That's what the scripture says, and keep yourself in the love of God. We keep ourselves there. We're gonna set ourselves up for good things. Yes, I'm Julie.
Well, I'm thinking when you were saying that, how you've learned through the years, and we know that's how God gives us wisdom, through the years and stuff. And I've often thought of Solomon, when he was given all the wisdom, if he wasn't allotted the kind of wisdom that we have as we get older at a young age, because how many times did he say that, it was grievous to know, then he'd go in and explain, and, as middle-aged and older adults, we can look back and, things that we didn't understand when we were younger, and now we do. It's almost like, I almost wish I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because, even just like time and how precious it is. We don't get that when we're young.
No.
We don't
I
understand
think
that.
you're gonna live forever. Right, Noah?
I mean, we know it in our head, but we don't know it in our heart. We don't really understand that.
That's why teenagers are so crazy, driving. I remember just in the mall parking lot, I'm like, oh man, I should not take my lunch now because the sentinel lights are there in the parking lot, and they are nuts. But you know what, I was that crazy too, to a certain degree, when I was a teenager.
Certain degree.
For some reason, I just don't see Andrew the rebel.
Yeah.
Phil maybe, but Andrew,
Well,
yeah.
you're just a valleyite.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, it's like, oh, I'm gonna speed through the parking lot, medium, what's that? People walking, I don't care, I'm gonna live forever. So that's kind of the attitude that they have, but it's not until you get a little bit older that you realize, wait a minute, then 401k starts slipping into your mind. And you have a whole different perspective on life.
You don't think of 401ks when you're, 16.
No,
Yeah.
you don't. A funny story though, I had a 401k when I was 18 years old. Then they found out it was illegal. I think they've reversed that since. At 18, you have to be 21 to get a 401k. So one day I've been putting in a 401k when I was working at Vans. I get this check back, it says here's a couple $100, and this is your 401k money that we've been collecting for years. Sorry, we can't keep it. So, good bonus, yeah. So,
Have you yelled at any kids to get off your lawn? No?
not the kids, but some adults, yeah.
Nice.
Call the cops every once in a
Some
while.
neighbors.
Some neighbors.
Yeah, it's my lawn, you
That's
crazy
right,
kid.
that's right. I'm not that far from that, I'll be honest with you. But that's the thing is that, Jesus took these opportunities knowing that time is fleeting, knowing that not only is life overall fleeting, but look at the time he had with his disciples. 3 years? 3 years is nothing. Where were you 3 years ago? 3 years ago is not that long ago. 3 years is all he had to talk to his disciples and teach them. And so if giving up a meal or giving up water and teaching them a lesson because of it was worth it, Jesus is going to do that. And so they're urging him. He's saying, you need to eat, teacher. What's he say to them? But he said to them, I have food to eat of which you do not know. Jesus is tired. He's hungry. He's thirsty. We've all been there. We've all been there. We know what that feels like. Sometimes when I get off work, I am starving. I remember coming home from school, just starving. Because I didn't eat like great of a lunch sometimes. I'd come home and I'd raid the cabinets because you're tired and you're hungry. And so Christ has been on a journey now, a long journey, very dusty, very dirty, very hot. And he's telling the disciples, I don't want anything to eat. And I don't want anything to drink. What does that mean? What could be more important than that? He says, I have food to eat of which you do not know. Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. And if that means it's more important than eating, in talking to the woman at the well and demonstrating, not telling them, demonstrating to the disciples that some things are more important than food, then that's what he's going to do. Because this is the lesson that he needs to teach them. That it's not all about waking up and paying the bills. It's about putting God first, like Noah talked about today. And if some things have to take a back seat to that, then that's what we have to do. And so he says, do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life. And that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap for that which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. And disciples, you're not even doing no work. This also tells me that sometimes we don't know that we're sowing so that somebody else can reap. That's what it tells me too. So our commission isn't to sow and make sure that we reap or else we feel like failures. It's sow, and you may never know what that reaps. It may be something, and that's a commission to all of us to keep trying. There's certain people at work that I think, I've actually prayed. I've been praying. I seem to get the worst offenders at work. People that, and I know we all deal with people like this, but I'm telling you, I got a special group of them. But I keep praying for them. They really can't be that bad. Okay, they're that bad. They can't really be that rotten. They're that rotten, okay? But I keep wanting to pray for them. I've actually asked the Lord, give me wisdom to maybe not pray for this person anymore. I've done that. I've given up on people before. And sometimes we really do need to do that. And this one super rotten egg, I really did do that. But at the same time, God's put us in our jobs or whatever for a reason. And those people there for a reason, guaranteed. So for us to, just pull the plug on somebody, we really don't want to make that decision. I felt led to actually do that. Felt like I was wasting my time. And really, sometimes we are wasting our time, trying to beat a dead horse. But Lord, lead me to the ones that aren't a dead horse and the ones that will hear. But bottom line, we're not looking for the sowing. For the reaping. We're looking to do the sowing and let God do the reaping. We can't control that part, like you've said a million times. And so for me to, Jesus is separating these things. He didn't say, you guys need to do all the sowing and you'll do all the reaping. No, he said other people have already sowed. John the Baptist, God himself working through people. I'm sending you out to do the reaping this time. You'll still do the sowing, but you're still going to do the reaping.
But wouldn't it be nice to know ahead of time if they're going to make it or not?
Mm-hmm.
That would be nice, yeah. When he refused to eat the food, that reminded me of a story in the Old Testament. I looked up in my concordance and I found it. Because David was a type of Christ. Okay, so a lot of things that David experienced were foreshadows of what Christ would do. Okay, and how many of you remember reading in 2 Samuel when David was always fighting the Philistines, right? Well, they had occupied Bethlehem, and David's group, they were on the run. And it says here, and David was then in a hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. Okay, so he's just longing for that water. Philistines are there, so he can't just go traipsing in. Okay. Well, 3 of his elite soldiers heard him say that. And so they thought to themselves, okay, let's go get him that water. Okay? So they broke through the host of the Philistines, these 3 mighty men, and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem, okay, right in the midst of the Philistines, okay, and took it and brought it to David. So that, here's your water, okay. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. He would not take it. Now they risked their lives. He says, and he said, be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things did these 3 mighty men. So out of respect for their hazarding their lives, he, yeah, thanks, just kind of in a nonchalant way, that represented they could have been killed. And so just in that moment he could have, but he didn't. And Jesus didn't eat that food, like you said, just refused it. He had something more important in mind.
Was it that story or another story that somebody had to come and tell him, like, what you just did is it really offended the people? the soldiers. And now you need to go make good on it. Do you remember that?
Jesus or David?
No, David.
David?
He did something where he kind of like, wasn't really thinking and,
Oh, Joab had to go to him, because Absalom was killed. Remember, he told Joab, don't kill him, and he did, okay. So then David
Oh,
found
that's
out
right.
that Joab had been murdered, and so he went into a deep, deep, deep mourning.
he was mourning for his enemy and he wasn't ignoring his person that had stuck by him.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. He was really offending him.
He said, Joab said, if you don't get up off the floor and go out there, you're gonna lose the whole kingdom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's, oh, how bad it looks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
And so, we see here that Jesus never skipping a beat on teaching his disciples a lesson. Refused to eat, refused to drink, I believe, and was wanting them to realize that there are certain things that are more important at the time than eating. And so food obviously was important, but certainly not their focus in life anymore. What were Peter and John? Fishermen. Yeah, that's what their occupation was, but it was feeding yourself, right? And Christ demonstrated this in a physical way when he refused to eat. Is what motivates us to get out of bed is just to simply pay the bills and feed ourselves? See, we have a clearer understanding than the world of spiritual things. We have a clearer understanding of how things will shake out in the end. And so let's let the kingdom be our motivator. And so at that point, if we let the kingdom be our motivator, we're not just going to hit a brick wall and say, oh, this is all I got. This isn't very much, but it's all I got. No, we need to lay treasures for ourselves up in heaven. When Jesus would bring that back with him. There, you can't, no thief's going to break in, nothing's going to destroy it, nothing's going to corrupt it. And so, for Christ to say no to food, which I used to maybe in my younger days, but I certainly don't anymore. I like food. I ended up cooking most of yesterday. Mexican food, I love Mexican food. But that's the thing, is that for him to say no to that, that's a statement there. And so he says, verse 38, I sent you to reap for that which you have not labored. Others have labored and you have entered into their labors. Disciples, your focus isn't going to be food. Your focus is going to be people. Your focus, after I'm gone, it's not just going to be make a buck and go get some fish. So he's tuning he's refocusing their focus. Disciples are all about, you need to eat, you need to eat. Yes, I will eat, but right now the situation calls for me talking to this lady and talking to these people in the Samaritan village. That's more important than me eating right now. And so there's certain situations where we have to realize that, it's not all about what we can get at the moment. It's all about, where does God want me? What does God want me to do? So if our focus is such that it's on him, then it's not going to be on the world. Excuse me. And so, verse 39 says, and many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, when she said, he told me all I ever did. And so this is what is interesting about this passage. Some simply believed because she went back and said, here's a man that told me everything I did. Could this be the Christ? They just simply believed that. They took her word that he told her everything and that it was a miracle. And they simply believed because of that. That's some people, probably the minority. But the majority of the people are just going to take more than that. And that's what we read here. So he says, so when the Samaritans had come to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. 2 days with the disciples, rubbing elbows with people they were told to never talk to. Talk about breaking down barriers. Have you ever thought about that? What would that have been like? Since birth, the disciples were told, you don't talk to these people. You don't have anything to do with them. In fact, the Bible says Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Talking to them, business-wise, nothing. 2 days. The disciples were there. I can picture them just be like, uh-oh, getting closer, we're rubbing elbows. I think about that. People they were told to not talk to. Cultural barrier, a religious barrier. And here for 2 days they heard Christ teach them. See, this is a foreshadowing of what's to come. And so that Philip, who's listening to this, later on remembers in chapter 8 of Acts, you know, I remember when we spent 2 days with the Samaritans, and I'm going to be sent to them, and I'm going to bring the gospel to them. Maybe it was Philip at this time that was really taken in by what he saw, and God chose him to go and be the liaison, if you will, the ambassador to the Samaritans. Remember, Jews, Samaritans, Gentiles. And many more believed because of his own word, not the word of the woman at the well, because of Jesus' own word. And they specifically told her that. So then they said to the woman, "Now we believe not because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world." Boy, if only all of Israel was that believing. Like that Gentile woman that came up to him, her faith was so great that this man, this prophet, could help her. He said, if only we could find that kind of faith in Israel. Do you see any other, in the scriptures that a lot of the Jewish cities, did they do this? I don't think as easily or as readily as even the Samaritans. The Samaritans begged him to stay, then they believed what he said. So it just goes to show you that it's the reason that God brought in the Gentiles. They were hungry, thirsty for that. Excuse me. And so they didn't take her word for it. Some did, but some of them said, "Now we believe because we've heard him ourselves. And so we believe that this is the Christ, the Savior of the world." And so remember, he was supposed to go to Galilee. He's just on his way up to Galilee. Not just on his way. He knew this would happen. But took the opportunity, spoke to the Samaritans, and many believed in him. Prepping them now. What did we talk about? We talked about sowing. Talk about a lot of seed that just got sown. And now he's on his way back to Galilee. It says, "Now after 2 days he departed from there and went to Galilee. For Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country." Where was Jesus from? What city? Not where he was born, Bethlehem. They were only there because they were court ordered to.
Nazareth.
He's from Nazareth, right? Nazareth is sort of around Galilee, kind of east of it a little bit, maybe west, I can't remember. But he says, "So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they had also gone to the feast." What does it say specifically about the Nazarenes, the people of Nazareth? What's it say specifically about them when Jesus came to visit them? "Hey, we know you.
You're
You are
carpenter's son."
Joseph's son,
Yeah.
and you're Mary's son, and you're just a carpenter. What are you doing teaching the people? We saw you grow up. Well, a prophet's not without honor. He has honor everywhere else except where he grew up. So that's why he says when he went to Galilee, the Galileans received him, the Samaritans received him, a whole host of people in Jerusalem, every other area, but not Nazareth. Nazareth, they just didn't have, and then I think Paul dealt with that too. Who was it that accepted Paul? A lot of churches that are hungry, the Gentiles and all that. Who's that rejected him? Well, the Pharisees. They wanted to kill him because they knew who he was. So they, you're not without honor except in your own country. It's kind of like when, we get a visiting preacher in here. Do we really sometimes we roll out the red carpet for a visiting preacher.
Man.
And we take our pastor for granted.
No, you
sometimes.
don't.
I find myself doing that, and I realize, wait a minute, can't do that. But
What I enjoy is, excuse me, we all still talk about this, those that heard him, Brother Marquez. He rolled out 3, I guess, fantastic messages, Rick Howard, they all did, and what I like is to see, the members eat it up, saying, because, you need that outside stimulus, you really do, otherwise it kind of becomes, kind of mundane, or can be, That's why church needs to have fresh input, or you're sitting on your orthodoxy, you're Pharisees, or like you said, the cities in Jerusalem, you know, they didn't see Jesus in front of them like the others who were further out. And so we keep reaching new people, and it keeps the church kind of, you know, fresh, and it stimulates the pastor, you know, and you know, new blood to preach to, right? You know, so I'm just zeroed in on Brian and Tamara. I'm just before that it was Rachel and Marlene. You know, I'm just not preaching at you, but I mean, it stimulates me. Okay, it gives me more. You know, not that you guys don't.
I was gonna say the rest of us don't.
No, I'm not.
Right.
No, but we all need that, that extra oomph, you know, and it keeps the church lively, really does. You know.
It's exciting when, you know, I know, you know, Tamara and Brian's backgrounds are the same as far as not hearing a lot of the biblical stories and a lot of the accounts and everything. So it's exciting for me to look and say, wow, this is cool because it's fresh, it's, you know, it's new and all that. And it's like, I love that. And so.
It is a challenge for a pastor of longevity. It is a challenge to keep the older sheep, you know, I don't mean in age, but I mean who've been in that church a long time.
So we don't matter and we're.
It's a challenge.
Bigger shovel to bury.
It's a challenge to keep them stimulated as well.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to keep, because otherwise it becomes Monday, you know, they hear their pastor week in and week out, you know. So there is a challenge for him to keep feeding them in a way that they keep their own lives on fire.
One thing that we haven't had to deal with here that other churches that you brought up in prayer or that we've seen firsthand, they don't have pastors. And we've never had to deal with that. That's been a wonderful thing. How long were we praying for the Spokane church to receive a pastor? A long time. And I'm thinking, man, what would that be like? But that's the thing is, you know, they have a solid guy in there now, and great guy.
Yeah.
And there's been other churches over the years, you know, but that's the thing is that we've never had to deal with that. That's a big lesson. If something.
Yeah, it still amazes me though, as long as I've been going to this church, as long as I have been reading scriptures, I still, every Sunday come and I hear something that, you know, I may have read it 100 times, and I still, you know, something new. Just like the reaping, the sowing and the reaping, you know, I've read that how many times, and it just now, you know, so.
And we all do that when we read, you know, when we read the scriptures and we're open. Say, Lord, teach me something. There's something that's just going to jump off the page. And that happens, like you said, in sermons and everything else. So it all depends on where our heart is. You know, if our heart's ready to learn, wanting to learn, we're going to learn. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's why it's nice having different personalities too. You have people with different backgrounds who have different experiences, and you know they can bring something different. So you're way better. I mean, different teacher than the pastor, and you bring your own experiences. You know, I've never heard the pastor in any way discuss vans.
Yeah.
Whereas you do. Okay, so
That's
you know,
bonus material.
Bonus.
You bring different experience and a different personality, a different
Yeah.
style, and you know, if it was the pastor 24/7, then I think, you know, it would be easier for us lay people to you know, parishioners to zone them out, because it sort of becomes the same. But I think one thing we've always had is we've had a variety of colorful, you know, leadership. And some that are still here, some that aren't, who have brought something different to a teaching type of role. And they bring their own examples, their own experiences, and, you know, as we're developing new people to bring, you know, Noah, maybe one day Brian, I mean, as these guys are sort of developing and learning to be able to share, they're gonna bring their experiences, which is different. You know, my experience is different than Andy's experiences, who are different than Noah's experiences, and et cetera, so. That's how it is, but that adds color to the body.
Absolutely.
It adds a color that, something they resonate more, like I'm sure Sister Hannah tunes you out, which I don't blame her. But
A prophet is not without honor except for
but you know, someone else may be like, oh yeah, oh my goodness, that's like the coolest thing that anyone's ever said up there. Thank you, Brother Andrew, for all that you've done, etc. You know, and on and on. So I think that's why you have to have that varied you know, Paul was probably a very different teacher than Peter, who was probably
Oh,
different
yeah.
than John. I mean, they all had their different experience,
Mhm.
and they all brought something different to the table.
That's the way God wants it, you know, he says, you know, come as you are, and you all conform to the image of Christ, but don't be robots, that's what
Right.
1 Corinthians teaches us, don't be a robot. You need to be, maybe it's 2 Corinthians, I don't know, but we need to bring who we are, our uniqueness to the table, and God can use that. And like Phil said, he said it very well, that we can listen to somebody, and then listen to somebody else, and it resonates with us differently for that one person. Then the next time might be the first person. But that's why God uses so many different personalities, puts them in the body, and says, you guys, you need to be walking in love and in the same
Frame of thinking.
doctrine, you know, let your doctrine be the same, yeah, overall
Balanced.
thinking.
I think this church is very balanced.
Balanced, yeah, we have to be balanced, without balance.
And we started very similarly to the way Jesus' ministry started. You had one person who sort of did it all. And so that person did it all, but in the meantime, knowingly or unknowingly, he was teaching and training people to be leaders, to be teachers, to present the word, how to do it, even how not to do it. He was doing that, and so Jesus did the same thing. So he groomed leadership while he was kind of taking on the majority of the preaching role while he was on the earth. But he was grooming them. I mean, how many sidebars did they have? I mean, how many was it just Jesus and his 12? How many times was it just Jesus and his 3? I mean, he even set them aside. And so Jesus, that sort of intensive training like that is what sparked and what was necessary for the church to have its early roots, its early beginnings. And it's the same thing. Many one-on-one conversations with the pastor, especially being homeschooled. I mean, I was home a lot, so we would have one-on-one time, even if it was just making him lunch, which I often did, because he's incapable of making his own lunch. Even back in the late 80s, right, Mom, back way
Yeah.
up here, I mean, Sister Vicky, right? And so,
I never missed a meal, never missed a meal.
yeah, correct. So even if it was just that, it was still one-on-one time. And it was sort of osmosisly learning. You had the same, and others have had the same opportunity to do that. Not in any way calling the pastor Jesus, but not quite. But anyways, you have that training like that, and that lends to your excitement and desire to want to share what you know. And not everyone's cut out for it, but those who are, our church has been blessed with people who have been really good at it. Even if whether they were here a short time or not, or still here, they were good at it when they did it. And the Lord has blessed us with that.
Amen.
Yeah, and you're right, just it adds color and everything, and that's why I like to have the conferences, whether it's our Spokane conference going here, or our own conference, where we focus in on a speaker and listen to him, and for a couple days. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, just to wrap this up here. So we hear in verse 44, it says, "For Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his country." And so what Philip said is kind of a good segue into what this next verse really points out. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast. For they had also gone to the feast. So this is shortly after the Passover. So if you go back with me over to John chapter 2, let's look at verse 23. Who remembers when Jesus cleansed the temple? In our study just a couple weeks ago, he makes a whip out of the cords, and he turning tables over, and he's saying, "You made my Father's house a house of merchandise." Very upset about that. The Jews were standing outside. They're like, "Well, what sign do you show us? You're a teacher. What sign do you show?" He says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." Do you think that caused a scene? Do you think people knew about that right there in the temple? They weren't just commanded to go to Jerusalem. They were commanded from all over Israel, from the north down to the south, to go to the temple. You think that would have made news? Jesus overturning tables? Oh, absolutely. So they saw that. They saw that. And not only that, but verse 23, this is now when he was at the Passover. When he was in Jerusalem at the Passover. During the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. And guess what? They went back to their hometowns. They went all over the map again. And this now is a culmination, beginning to be a culmination of what they saw in Jerusalem. His word is starting to spread. Even though Jesus wasn't there physically yet, word had already gone back to the area of Galilee. So let's read that again, 45, so chapter 4, 45. It says, so when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him. They didn't say, who are you? Having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they had also gone to the feast. It was a commandment to go to the feast. It was not optional. If you're a Jew, you went to the feast in Jerusalem. So what better way, what better moment did Jesus have to demonstrate a little bit of his power, a whole lot of his teaching, than to be at Jerusalem at that time? And given the short amount of time Jesus had to work with, do you think he could have been everywhere at once? Not the way he did. His disciples followed him around. Yeah, he sent them out by themselves every once in a while, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Everybody came to him in Jerusalem. He showed them anything, and then they went out. So we see that because of that, people are getting primed, people are getting prepped for his ministry when he goes back there. So I guess it just boils down to we never know whose life we're going to touch. We never know what influence we're going to have on people. If God could give us a window into that, we'd be a lot different people. But we're not pickers of, we're not winners of, what is it? They always talk about the government picking winners and losers, and contracts and stuff. We don't get to pick winners and losers. We get just to pick, we don't get to pick. We just get to speak and to live our lives the way that we should. And let other people see that. Chips fall where they might.
But that's part of giving everybody the opportunity to do the work, you know, if we knew, we would avoid, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's why the whole,
why waste the time?
yeah, and that's why the doctrine of, you can call it doctrine, predestination is such a farce. You know, it's like you're predestined to either believe or not by God from the time before you were born. It's not true. That is absolutely not true. God doesn't operate like that. All right. Anybody have anything else? All right, let's go to business.